I planned a celebration dinner for my big achievement, but when I walked in, my dad had replaced everything with a party for my stepsister's first month at her entry-level job. You guys, I still can't believe this actually happened. Imagine pouring your heart and soul into something for years, finally achieving a massive milestone, only for the one person who should be celebrating you the loudest to utterly shatter that moment, turning it into a twisted, humiliating circus for someone else. My own father did just that, and let me tell you, it was a gut punch I'll never forget. Getting that promotion wasn't just a pat on the back, it was the culmination of years of grinding. I'm 26, and I'd spent countless hours taking on extra projects, staying late, meticulously perfecting my work. When my manager called me in to deliver the news, I swear my heart almost burst. Before I could even fully process it, my team erupted in cheers. This wasn't just a step, it was a leap forward in my career, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly, deeply proud of myself. Naturally, everyone wanted to celebrate. One of my closest friends suggested dinner, and before I knew it, it had snowballed into a full-blown party. A restaurant was booked, RSVPs were flying in. My mom and a few other relatives were absolutely thrilled, promising they'd be there. Even my dad said he'd come, though looking back, his reaction should have been a giant, flashing red flag. When I told him, instead of a proper congratulations, all he offered was a lukewarm, "Oh, that's nice." And then, immediately, that cold water splash. Well, don't let this get to your head. Promotions don't mean anything unless you can actually handle the responsibility. It wasn't the reaction I wanted, but it wasn't surprising either. I'd learned a long time ago that my dad had a strange talent for never truly celebrating my achievements. He always found a way to downplay them, or worse, pivot the conversation to someone else. Usually, that someone else was my stepsister, Lauren, who's 20. Lauren had only started working a month ago, fresh out of college. And let's be honest, it wasn't some big, dream job. It was an entry-level position that required zero experience. Nothing about it was special, but you wouldn't have known that from the way my dad talked about it. He acted like she'd cured cancer or won a Nobel Prize. He'd always put her on a pedestal, making excuses for her laziness and hyping up every tiny thing she did. I didn't have an issue with Lauren personally, but it was clear as day, my dad treated her like gold, while I was expected to just handle things on my own. Still, I brushed it off. I deserved this moment. I pushed away the negative thoughts and spent the next few days buzzing with excitement, picking out a gorgeous outfit, making sure every detail was perfect. My friends reassured me it was going to be an amazing night. I held on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would acknowledge my success this time. The day of the celebration finally arrived. I got ready, feeling confident, happy, and walked into the restaurant. I'd invited about 20 people, friends, coworkers, family, and I couldn't wait to see everyone. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside were the decorations. Balloons, a banner, even a cake set up at the main table. I hadn't arranged any of that. For a fleeting second, my heart swelled. Had my dad actually gone out of his way to do something genuinely nice for me? Then I took a closer look. The banner. It didn't have my name on it. It had Lauren's. "Congratulations on 1 month at work, Lauren." For a few horrifying seconds, I thought I was hallucinating. My brain just refused to process what I was seeing. I scanned the room. My coworkers were sitting there, eyes wide, looking as utterly confused as I felt. My mom's face was a mask of pure fury, like she was about to explode. And my dad? He was beaming, standing proudly next to Lauren, like he'd just pulled off the greatest, most heartwarming surprise in history. I turned to my friend, the one who'd helped me organize the whole thing, and she looked absolutely livid. She whispered, her voice tight with anger, that she had no idea this was going to happen, that everything had been changed last minute. Lauren, meanwhile, looked smug, but also a little uncertain. It was clear she hadn't expected this much attention, and now that she had it, she didn't quite know what to do with it. My dad finally noticed me standing there, still frozen, and his smile widened. "You're here. Isn't this great? I thought it would be nice to celebrate both of you together, but I figured we should highlight Lauren a little more. After all, it's the small wins that count." Small wins. Small wins. I had spent years busting my ass, sacrificing, working relentlessly to earn this promotion, and he had just hijacked my night, turning it into some ridiculous, over-the-top celebration for my stepsister surviving 4 weeks at an entry-level job. I could feel my stomach twisting with a cold, hard anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to cause a scene. Not yet. Lauren giggled, mumbled something about not expecting it, but I could see she was absolutely loving it. My dad droned on about how important it was to uplift and encourage people at the start of their careers, how it wasn't always about big promotions and fancy titles. I was speechless. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all was overwhelming. People hesitantly sat down, clearly unsure how to react. My friends and coworkers were visibly uncomfortable. A few of them, bless their hearts, tried to steer the conversation back to me, asking about my promotion, congratulating me. But my dad? Oh, he just kept yanking it right back to Lauren. Lauren, tell everyone about your first week. What's the biggest thing you've learned so far? Oh, we should all take turns sharing advice for Lauren as she starts her career. I couldn't believe my ears. No one had anything to say. What was there to say? Good job on showing up to work every day. The room filled with the most excruciating, awkward silence. The only sound was the faint clinking of utensils as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lauren tried to play along, but even she sensed the absolute mortification hanging in the air. The forced smiles, the half-hearted applause. It was painfully obvious that no one cared. I just sat there, watching it all unfold, waiting for my dad to finally realize how badly he had miscalculated. But he remained completely oblivious, still pushing this insane narrative that Lauren's small win was somehow just as important as my years of blood, sweat, and tears. At one point, my best friend leaned over, her voice a tight whisper. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Do you want to just leave?" Oh, I was tempted. Every second that ticked by made it harder to sit there and pretend I was okay with what was happening. But a part of me, a dark, vengeful part, wanted to see this play out. I wanted to see my dad's face when he finally realized that absolutely no one was buying his nonsense. So I stayed, and I watched as his grand plan slowly crumbled under the weight of its own absurdity. He'd expected heartfelt, joyous reactions, maybe even enthusiastic speeches about Lauren's impressive accomplishment. Instead, there was just silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. People looked at each other, unsure what to do, even after he repeated his questions multiple times. A few offered polite nods to Lauren, maybe a couple of weak claps, but the energy was dead. You could see my coworkers debating whether they should just get up and leave, but they were too polite to cause a scene, unlike my dad. Even Lauren, who had initially been basking in the attention, started shifting uncomfortably. I could see the embarrassment creeping onto her face. My dad, however, was still determined, still pushing. He tried to restart the conversation, asking Lauren again what she'd learned in her first month. She blinked, then mumbled something generic about being on time, and teamwork is essential. Another pause. More silence. My best friend leaned over again, murmuring, "She's just describing the back of an employee handbook." I had to bite my cheek hard to keep from laughing out loud. My dad, still completely oblivious, turned to my mom and encouraged her to say a few words about Lauren's journey. My mom, who had been visibly fuming this entire time, gave him this long, withering look that could curdle milk. Then she spoke. She said it was nice that Lauren was settling into her job, but that tonight was supposed to be about my promotion, a promotion that I had worked incredibly hard for. Then, in the most pointed tone imaginable, she added, "Real achievements deserve real recognition." The meaning behind her words couldn't have been clearer. I was surprised she'd kept quiet for so long, but my colleagues were there, and I knew she didn't want to embarrass me. Unlike my father, she was actually a good parent. My dad's face darkened for a split second, but he forced out a chuckle, waving a dismissive hand. He said there was no need to compare accomplishments, and that supporting each other was more important than personal recognition. That was it. I finally lost my patience. I turned to him, my voice dangerously calm. "Why do you think it's okay to overshadow my celebration for something as insignificant as 1 month at an entry-level job?" He scoffed. "You're overreacting. You should be mature enough to share the spotlight." "This isn't sharing." I shot back, my voice still steady but laced with steel. "This is taking over. My promotion celebration was planned for me. My friends, my coworkers, my family are here to celebrate something I worked years for. And yet, The moment you had a chance, you turned it into some ridiculous event for Lauren, acting as if we'd done something equally important. My irritation was clear now, undeniable. I've spent years proving myself in my field, going above and beyond, earning this moment. Lauren has been showing up to work for a few weeks. That isn't the same thing, no matter how desperately you want it to be. Lauren, poor thing, looked absolutely mortified at this point. She was smart enough to realize how utterly ridiculous the situation was. Unlike my dad, she wasn't hell-bent on forcing this charade. She kept her head down, fiddling with the edge of the tablecloth. My dad, however, was still clinging to his delusions. He shot back that I was being selfish, that I had more than enough recognition, and that it wasn't a big deal to let Lauren have some attention, too. That was when one of my coworkers, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. She's an older woman, someone I respect immensely, and she has absolutely zero patience for nonsense. She said, bluntly, "No one came here tonight to celebrate 1 month at a job, and it's ridiculous to pretend otherwise." My dad opened his mouth to argue, but she kept going. "I've been in the workforce for decades, and I have never, not once, seen anyone throw a party for simply showing up to work for a month." She looked directly at my dad. "What exactly did you expect people to say? Congratulations for doing the bare minimum." I saw my dad's expression twitch then. But she wasn't done. And in all my years, I've also never seen a father go out of his way to downplay his own child's success like this. In any normal situation, a father would be proud. He would want his child to have their moment, instead of desperately trying to redirect the spotlight. Then she leaned back in her chair, a slight, knowing smile on her face. "But hey, that's just my perspective." My dad looked furious, his face dark red, but he couldn't say a word. The room was now completely against him. Even Lauren wasn't on his side. I turned to her and asked if she had known about this in advance. She quickly shook her head, her voice barely a whisper, saying she had no idea he was going to do this. She'd thought she was just coming to celebrate my promotion, and she never asked for any of this. I believed her. Lauren could be spoiled, but she wasn't stupid. She knew this whole thing was humiliating. She mumbled an apology, then quietly excused herself to go to the bathroom. At this point, the atmosphere was so thick with discomfort that people started whispering about leaving. My friends and coworkers had sat through enough of this awkward disaster, and no one was in the mood to pretend anymore. My dad, seeing his pathetic party falling apart around him, suddenly got defensive. He went from smug to irritated in an instant, claiming that this wasn't his fault. He accused me of ruining the night by being so ungrateful and making a big deal out of nothing. I had to laugh. A sharp, humorless laugh. "You want to know who ruined the night?" I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Your attempt to hijack my celebration already failed miserably. No one is impressed. No one thinks this is some touching moment of support. You've embarrassed yourself." And then, I threw his own cruel words right back at him. "It's the small wins that count, right?" Well, I'd say tonight's small win is watching everyone realize just how ridiculous you're being. That was the final nail in the coffin. People started leaving. My friends walked out first, my coworkers right behind them. My best friend gave me a tight hug before she left, muttering that I deserved way better than this mess. Lauren eventually came back, looking even more embarrassed than before, quietly grabbed her things, and left too. She didn't say a word to my dad. And then, it was just me, my mom, and my dad left at the table. He looked around, utterly bewildered, as if genuinely shocked that things had blown up in his face. My mom gave him one last, unimpressed look, stood up, and said she was leaving too. She turned to me, a warm smile on her face. "We should go get drinks somewhere else, honey. Somewhere that wasn't ruined by nonsense." I agreed instantly, grabbing my things. As we walked out, my dad called after me, still desperately trying to paint me as the villain. He shouted that I was the one who made it awkward, that I was selfish, and that I should have just gone along with it. I didn't even bother responding, because at the end of the day, it wasn't me who ruined that night. It was him. Update 1*. The next morning, my phone was absolutely blowing up. Unsurprisingly, most of the texts were about last night's disaster. Some were from my friends, checking in on me, still laughing about how painfully awkward it had been. Others were from coworkers, still in disbelief that my dad had actually tried to pass off a 1-month job anniversary as some monumental accomplishment. But of course, the real highlight was my dad's messages. He had apparently spent the entire night stewing in his humiliation. And now, instead of reflecting on his own behavior, he had decided that everything was my fault. His first message was short and dripping with passive aggression. He said I owed Lauren an apology for embarrassing her in front of everyone. I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw my brain. Lauren wasn't embarrassed because of me. She was embarrassed because he had put her in an impossible position. He had set her up to be the center of attention for something that didn't deserve recognition. And the moment she realized it, she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. That wasn't on me. That was entirely on him. But my dad wasn't done. His next texts were these long, winding paragraphs about family values and how I had tried to overshadow Lauren out of pettiness. That one actually made me laugh out loud. I tried to overshadow her. The entire night had been planned as a celebration for my promotion. The restaurant had been booked for me. My friends and coworkers had come to celebrate me. And yet somehow I was the one trying to steal the spotlight. It was so utterly absurd that I didn't even know where to begin. I ignored his messages for the time being, knowing that anything I said right then would only escalate into a pointless argument. But, predictably, my silence only made him angrier. An hour later, my mom called. She sounded completely exasperated, saying my dad had been ranting all morning about my attitude. She, too, had been ignoring his calls and texts. She asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee, and I agreed immediately. I desperately needed to vent. When I got to the coffee shop, my mom was already there, sipping her drink and shaking her head. She said he was still convinced that I was the villain in all this, and now he was saying that I had intentionally ruined the night by making a scene. I let out a humorless laugh. The night was ruined, I told her, the moment he decided to turn my celebration into some pity party for Lauren. I did nothing but react to what was already a train wreck. She sighed, agreeing with me completely, but added, "Dad's not going to see it that way. He's built up this image of himself as the fair, supportive parent who encourages all of his kids equally. And now that people have called him out on how ridiculous he was, he's scrambling to justify himself." I asked her if Lauren had said anything. She shook her head, saying Lauren was probably just hiding out, hoping to avoid the fallout. I wasn't surprised. Lauren wasn't a bad person. She could be entitled at times, but she wasn't delusional. She had been just as embarrassed as everyone else when my dad tried to make her the center of attention, even if she might have enjoyed it for a minute. Still, I was beyond annoyed. I told my mom I was tired of this pattern. Every time my dad did something ridiculous, he found a way to blame me instead of just admitting he was wrong. And now he wanted me to apologize for his own mistake. She sighed, not blaming me for being frustrated. Then she took a sip of her coffee and said something that made me pause. "This isn't about you or Lauren," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It never was." I frowned, not understanding at first. She leaned forward. "Your dad has always been like this. He's always needed to control the narrative, to make himself look like the generous, selfless father who uplifts everyone. Last night was his moment. He saw it as an opportunity to play the hero, to act like the supportive dad who made sure no child was left behind." She paused, her gaze piercing. But the problem was, he manufactured a situation where that wasn't even necessary. He wasn't actually doing this for Lauren. He was doing it for himself. That made me sit back and think. She was absolutely right. If he had really cared about Lauren's feelings, he wouldn't have thrown her into such an awkward, humiliating situation. He wouldn't have forced her to perform in front of my guests, scrambling to come up with something impressive to say when there was nothing impressive to share. He hadn't done this for her. He had done this for his own massive ego. And now that it had blown up in his face, he was desperate to rewrite the story. He couldn't handle the fact that people had seen right through him, that they had called him out. That was why he was so focused on blaming me. Because if I was the problem, then he wasn't. I let out a deep breath, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted. My mom patted my hand, telling me I didn't have to respond to him right away. She said he would eventually stop spiraling. But until then, there was no point in trying to reason with him. I nodded, deciding she was right. But just as I was about to put my phone away, another message popped up from my dad. It simply said, "I hope you're happy. You ruined your own celebration by acting like a selfish brat." I stared at it for a moment, then turned my phone face down on the table. I looked at my mom. "He really doesn't get it, does he?" She sighed, shook her head. "No, and he probably never will." I exhaled sharply. Then that's his problem, I said, a new resolve hardening in my voice. Not mine. Update 2 asterisk. I spent the rest of the day ignoring my dad's texts. Every time I saw his name pop up, I felt my blood pressure spike. But instead of engaging, I focused on myself. I went for a long walk, blasted music in my headphones, and tried to clear my head. I kept replaying my mom's words in my mind. How this was never really about me or Lauren, but about him. She was so right. This wasn't the first time he had pulled something like this. Maybe not as blatant, but he had a habit of shifting the spotlight whenever I achieved something, either by downplaying it or making it about someone else. I thought back to when I graduated college. My dad had barely acknowledged it because Lauren was struggling to pass her classes at the time. He'd actually told me I should be considerate and not make her feel bad. Then there was the time I got my first job. Instead of congratulating me, he had gone on and on about how Lauren was still figuring things out, as if my success was a threat to her. Now I had gotten a major promotion, something I had worked so incredibly hard for, and he had decided that Lauren completing 1 month at her job was equally deserving of a celebration. And then, when it all blew up in his face, I was the one getting blamed. I couldn't do this anymore. I wasn't going to keep letting my dad rewrite reality to make himself feel better. I wasn't going to apologize for expecting to be celebrated in my own right. So, I made a decision. I was done trying to make my dad see my worth. If he wanted to pretend that I was the villain in this story, that was his problem. I wasn't going to waste any more energy proving myself to someone who refused to acknowledge my hard work. That night, I finally responded to his messages. I told him that I wasn't going to apologize because I had nothing to apologize for. I said that he had made a fool of himself, and instead of taking accountability, he was lashing out at me to protect his ego. I said that if he couldn't be happy for me without making it about Lauren, then maybe it would be best if he just stopped pretending to care altogether. Then, I muted the chat and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to even more messages from my dad, and they were even more dramatic than before. He called me disrespectful, said I was selfish beyond belief. He said that I clearly didn't care about family and that my ego had gotten too big. Mine or his. I just rolled my eyes and deleted the messages. A few hours later, I got a call from Lauren. I hesitated before picking up, half expecting her to take my dad's side. But to my surprise, she sounded genuinely embarrassed. She said that she didn't blame me for what happened and that she wished our dad had never done any of that in the first place. She admitted that she had felt humiliated when everyone awkwardly clapped for her, and she was frustrated that our dad was now making this into an even bigger mess. I told her that I appreciated her saying that, but I also asked why she hadn't spoken up sooner. She sighed and said that she had tried. She had told our dad that she didn't want a party, but he had insisted, and now that it had backfired, he was just doubling down instead of just admitting he was wrong. I asked if she was going to tell him to stop blaming me. She hesitated before saying that she would try, but she wasn't sure if he would listen. Even Lauren knew how to keep up appearances. I thanked her for calling, but deep down, I already knew that it wouldn't make a difference. My dad never admitted he was wrong. Later that evening, my dad decided to take things a step further. Since I wasn't engaging with him, he sent a long-winded message to our entire family group chat. He went on about how disappointed he was in me, how I had disrespected the family, how I had turned my back on my own sister for my own selfish reasons. He painted me as some cold, heartless person who refused to celebrate other people's wins, completely ignoring the fact that this was my celebration in the first place. It was so ridiculous that I just laughed. But the best part? Nobody in the family agreed with him. In fact, most people completely ignored his message. The only responses were from one of my aunts and a cousin, both of whom just sent vague, "Let's all calm down" kind of messages, clearly trying to stay neutral. No one was rushing to defend him. No one was telling me that I was wrong, because they all knew. They all saw exactly what had happened, or at least had heard about it. And that must have driven my dad absolutely crazy. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on this nonsense. If my dad wanted to keep playing the victim, then that was his problem. I don't have to keep proving myself to someone who refuses to see me. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my dad to acknowledge my hard work, to celebrate me the way he celebrated Lauren. But he never would. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because he needed to keep pushing this ridiculous narrative where I was the problem and Lauren was the one who needed uplifting. And if that was the story he wanted to tell, then fine. I just wouldn't be a part of it anymore. Update 3 asterisk a week later, I had another celebration. This time, it was exactly how it should have been from the start. It wasn't anything over the top, just a beautiful, warm dinner with my closest friends, some coworkers, and the family members who had actually supported me. My mom came, of course, and so did some of my aunts and cousins. But this time, there was no last-minute hijacking, no awkward forced applause, no one trying to turn the night into something it wasn't. Just me, surrounded by people who were genuinely, unreservedly happy for me. I hadn't invited my dad or Lauren, not out of spite, but because I had finally realized something profound. I didn't owe them a spot in my happiness. If my dad was going to keep making everything about Lauren, if he was going to keep finding ways to undermine my achievements, then why should I keep giving him the opportunity? Why should I keep letting him into spaces meant to celebrate me when all he ever did was shift the attention elsewhere? I was done. From now on, I was going to handle him the same way I handled distant relatives I barely saw. If we happened to be at the same family gathering, fine, I'd be polite. I'd make small talk if needed, but I wasn't going to invite him into my life anymore. He wasn't going to be at my celebrations. He wasn't going to be in my corner. He had made it abundantly clear where his priorities lay, and I wasn't about to keep begging for a spot on his list. I wasn't even going to have some big, dramatic conversation about it. No fights, no ultimatums, no long-winded explanations. Just a slow, steady, quiet removal of him from my life. If he noticed, that was his problem. If he didn't, even better. I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I felt in control of my own happiness. And as I sat there, surrounded by people who truly wanted to be there for me, radiating genuine joy, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had made the right choice.